Thank you for coming today. As Chris mentioned, we're going to talk about a specific subject that's known as ERM, or Enterprise Report Management, which we're going to focus on a little bit of definition of exactly what that means because people have different definition of what that means. But every large organization has that problem or has that thing to deal with. And bringing it into Alfresco, I think is going to be a great low-hanging fruit, not only for your Alfresco initiatives, but actually for your enterprise report management. So the way I see it, for example, if eventually that's going to be done, it's just a matter of who's going to get there faster. When we started, for example, Chris's analogy about his phone, the rotary phone, nobody's going to try to sell you a smartphone today, let's say without a camera, right? We all had our digital camera and our phone for a while. We carried both. I don't think anybody carries that. So I think that would be a good analogy, that we all have our ERM solution that manages a certain kind of content, and we have our ECM, let's say we have our Alfresco running in parallel to that. And that, to me, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because there's a lot of cool, great features in Alfresco that you can leverage, bring into your ERM, and vice versa. So that's going to be the topic that we're going to talk about today. As you know, Chris mentioned the time frame all the way from 1950s to today, and how all these great systems have helped us to grow our economy, create jobs, and do things faster and better. But fundamentally, the problem is still the same. People talk about, you keep hearing content chaos and content explosion. People were talking about that kind of thing. Maybe they weren't using the same words, but when these mainframes started printing those green bars, people used forklifts and semi-trucks to carry all those paper all over the country. And if you look at the offices, some of the pictures of offices in the 70s and 80s, none of you is old enough to remember that in this crowd, but I remember that offices was full of boxes. Now that obviously has changed, but we're still talking about lots of information. So, when I bought my first computer in 1987, it was a 286 with 10 megabyte of hard drive, 10 megabyte. And the processor speed was 4.77 megahertz. No, I'm not talking about gigahertz, megahertz. And that was like super fast. It was a supercomputer at that time. The baseline memory came with 128. I went for the most available thing out there was 640 kilobyte. Now, if you tell these stories to your kids or the younger people, they're going to laugh at you. What are you talking about? Because in the thumb drive, they have thousands of times more capacity power. But it's all relative, right? We had the same issue. It's just that technology has changed. But I think fundamentally, we're still talking about how do we grow our business, how do we do things faster, and technology can help us do that. And a good example, for example, Walmart, which I think is the biggest has the biggest number of employees in the world, is a company that would not have been able to grow this big. It's impossible without the usage of computers and technology. So just a brief introduction of, you're very familiar, I'm assuming you're very familiar with document management because you're at Alfresco Summit, and you're either currently heavily using the product or you're thinking about using the product, and maybe you're using a similar thing. You may not be as familiar with ERM, but I think it's important to kind of look at the differences first and then talk about how do we bring them together. So in a document management, things are normally run by the user. Users run the document management application. So as an example, users decide to create a folder and then organize their information on their folder. Or in an ECM, basically, it starts with creating a site. And then under the site, you create folders, and then content gets categorized under that. That's not the case in the ERM. Yeah, basically, once a taxonomy or a folder structure is created, everything at that point happens automatically. So when content comes into an ERM solution, basically it goes under a given folder, predefined folder based on some classification algorithm. this is the second point is also very important. Documents have versions, and so for example, when Chris and I were putting this this presentation that you're seeing today, I created, let's say, version number 1, and it had a bunch of slides and a bunch of pages, and then Chris basically modified it. It was version 2, and then I modified it, and then somebody else modified it. And finally, we had a final version you're looking at today. So that's how basically you operate in document management. Whereas in a record management or enterprise report management, you have generation. So when a computer generates a bill or an invoice or a purchase order or a general ledger report, it's basically based on a window of time. So for example, annual report for 2013. And that's a generation. And then you have a similar generation for, let's say, 2013, 2012, and so on and so forth. So that's a major, major difference. Documents are created at any time by anyone for any purpose. That's a great thing. It's pretty much like you take pictures with your phone and write text messages, and that's how you kind of operate document. You basically decide to create content and put it out there. Whereas the generations are not created kind of ad hoc randomly. They're basically, again, as part of your business process, is done automatically. In the document management, documents are constantly being modified by user, whereas in enterprise report management, actually no changes are allowed to generations. Primarily, if you're sending your customer a bill, you don't want to actually modify it, and then when they call you, and then you're looking at 2 different things, right? And then there are obviously compliance requirements. In a document management, documents can be deleted by the user or kept forever, whereas in enterprise report management, everything is automated in terms of retention criteria. So for example, you would say, this particular general ledger report, I want to keep it online for 12 versions or 12 generations. And then when the 13th one comes, archive the first one or delete the first one. Or you want to say, I want to keep these types of documents due to legal reasons for 7 years. And when 7 year and 1 day comes, your lawyers will tell you, please destroy them. I don't want to. I don't want them archived, I don't want them anywhere. And so that's a very important differentiator between document management, record management, or enterprise report management. And then the last one is very important because I think that's how the documents actually get introduced to an organization. In the document management, people use tools and Office application, word processor, PowerPoint, all those kind of tools, but humans basically create those documents. So whether it's a proposal or a contract, human beings actually put together the document. They use tools, and the purpose is those documents have to, again, be consumed by another human or other human beings. They're not designed to be consumed by computers. So they're created by humans, designed to be consumed by humans, but they're obviously you use computers and tools to store them, create them, that kind of thing. Whereas in an enterprise report management, documents are not created by humans. They're created by computer programs. SAP creates them. Oracle creates them. Peoplesoft creates them. J.D. Edwards creates them. Your own computer program creates them. But they're also designed to be consumed by humans. They're not designed to be consumed by computer programs. And that's really the topic today. The data that's generated by a computer program designed to be consumed by humans, usually it's hard to deal with them if you don't have the right capabilities. And so that we're going to talk about those capabilities that not only brings that stuff into Alfresco, but will make it so that if you decide that the report was designed for one purpose, if you want to use it for another purpose, with those kind of capabilities, you can easily do that. So one way, I think we kind of, if you take a step back and instead of talking about reports and documents, we'll take a look at our entire content in our organization as a business. AIIM actually has a good way of categorizing, in my opinion, the content in your organization. So instead of talking about okay, I got video file, I got audio file, I got images, talk about formats. let's talk about what are the actual differences between all the kinds of content you have in an organization. So we know structured content, they're designed to be consumed by computers. So these are databases, relational databases that runs today any business. So they're designed basically data that's entered by either computers or human to a database, but they're designed to basically run a business. We're not going to talk about structured content today. That's basically out of scope of our talk today. But that's a good chunk of your data. And then you already know about unstructured data. That's why Alfresco comes in. And that's why all document management is basically deal with that unstructured. But AIIM says there's actually a type of content that falls somewhere in between. It's not really unstructured and it's not really structured. And the reason for that is, again, it's because it's produced by computers, consumed by humans. So when that happens, for example, if that's designed to be printed on a piece of paper, in order to conserve ink and space and paper, and humans are smart, basically there's some sort of normalization that takes place in that kind of content. So for example, when you look at a report or statement, you have some data, and then you have some identifiers or labels. And so for example, you have a customer name, customer number appearing once on your statement, on your report, and then you have data that's relevant to that customer. Now, if you want to store that in a database, you don't store it like that. You basically, for every record, you have to know exactly who this data belongs to. Whereas for human beings, because we are smart, we're not as fast as computers, but we're actually a lot smarter than computers. So that's really the key difference. And so that's the area that we're going to talk in details about. How do we handle that? How do we bring it into Alfresco? And how can we benefit from that kind of content? Because this is a lot of value in organization, in my opinion, that's being untapped. I mean, you use it as part of your business process, but if you bring it into Alfresco and actually start making it available to the right person at the right time with the right security, with the right tools, it's going to translate directly and indirectly to better customer satisfaction. It's going to translate into being more competitive in the marketplace. It's going to increase your top line, and it's going to improve your profitability. And this is, after all, every commercial entity is after in this day and age. So this is the key thing we're going to talk about today. AIIM actually, so some estimate in terms of how much of this, what kind of compromises this type of content in your organization. AIIM did a survey of, they looked at the large employers. So the minimum was 1,000 employees. So between 1,000 and 5,000, you can see 34% of people participated in this survey, and then 38% of more than 25,000 people. So these people said between 25 to 75% of all of our content in our organization is that semi-structured data that I was talking about. And these are basically bills, invoices, purchase order, reports, all that kind of stuff. So it's a ton of data that is actually doing something and it's fulfilling your back office requirement, but the organizations are not actually leveraging it enough, in my opinion, again, to get the maximum value out of that kind of content. So what do they use it for? There is obviously financial planning, risk management, those kind of decisions in terms of financial planning and risk management has to be on factual things. So you look at the past and not speculating. You start with actual facts. And enterprise reports and statements are factual things that happened in the past. So they look at that stuff and then they can project future. They can actually assess risk going forward. So there's a lot of usage for that. And then the customer-related stuff, whether it's customer self-service, putting stuff out on the web, that kind of content for customers. So we all kind of receiving less and less bills and papers. It's that kind of thing is the most obvious kind of thing. Is if I want to look at my AT&T or my carrier July bill, I don't necessarily have to go my file cabinet these days. I can go to AT&T's website and a lot of that kind of stuff. I think there's more that can be done, but some of that stuff is being done. And then the number 2, customer support via support stuff. That happens with all of our customers. All of our customers use our product for that kind of thing, because once they send out something to a customer, whether it's electronic or whether it's by paper, they want to keep an exact identical record of that. So when the customer calls, and it's a very frustrating, we've all gone through that experience, that calling some customer service and then saying, here's what I'm saying, and then it seems like they're looking at something entirely different. It takes minutes and hours and multiple calls, and you just don't understand why is it that it's so hard for them to look at something you're looking at. And that's those organizations who are not doing the kind of thing that they should be doing. So in my estimate, again, it varies from organization to organization. In my estimate, if you don't do what I'm asking you to do, is actually you're leaving 40% of your content basically kind of unavailable at the right place at the right time for the right person. So this is an incredible amount of content that I don't think is being fully utilized to get maximum value out of it. So again, in summary, this gives you kind of a good picture of what are those kind of contents that we call semi-structured content. They're typically paginated report when we're talking about enterprise reports, but pagination is like, it's not like, again, like database tables. It's not like raw data. It's not XML. It's designed, again, to be consumed by people. So when people decide to print them, they can be paginated in the right format. And some examples, but typically these are big core operational systems, whether they're financial system, whether they're ERP, enterprise resource planning systems, whether they're homegrown systems. They kind of run in the background in an automated way, and they, sometimes they get shipped out, their output to a third party, and they get printed. Sometimes they get shipped out to another homegrown system you may have. Sometimes they get shipped to a commercial software you may have. But that basically they run automatically, and that they do fulfill the primary purpose of the business, but they're not being leveraged again. So the main sources for creating this kind of content, we see still in 2014, a lot of good mainframe computer programs that people wrote in 60s and 70s and even 80s are still running our big banks in the entire planet, and are still very large organizations are still depending on. They're very reliable, and so there's still a good chunk of that data coming from basically mainframe legacy applications. And then the second ones, as you know, in the 90s, ERPs really took off, and the chief among them, SAP, and now Oracle has all of those things. I think Oracle bought J.D. Edwards and Peoplesoft. But anyway, Oracle and SAP are the two big players in that market. So they create lots and lots of content for any organization. And then reporting applications such as Crystal. I don't know if people are familiar with Crystal. It's kind of the main leading report writer application that runs against any database or any application, and you can customize or create any kind of report you want. So that's another primary source of that kind of content. So the process in basically in this type of, again, you're very familiar with document management. The process for creating and managing semi-structured content usually starts with kind of a content definition or introduction, because the type of content that are introduced in an organization is not as dynamic, as volatile. So for example, when you implement, let's say, an SAP solution, initially let's say you introduce hundreds and hundreds or maybe thousands of types of content you're going to produce. So initially you have to introduce, and the customers decide, basically based on the nature of the business, how many types of financial reports they want, how many types of manufacturing reports they want. So there's a process that if you want to bring it into an ERM solution, you want to introduce that to our ERM, because from then on, everything will be automated. And So the introduction or content definition is a one-time deal per content type. And a lot of times, basically, they allow you to do a sample upload. And then you say, you upload a version or a generation or a sample of that document. And then you define the rules, basically. You say, I want to retain this document for this length of time. I want it available to these people, these security groups. I want to secure it this way. I want to convert it to Excel. So all the rules that go with that document is basically it's introduced one time and one time only. And then the next step is the content acquisition. There's many ways to acquire the content. This is actually the manual upload that there's no bullet for it, is actually the very least way, which is sort of the most common way of doing it in document management, least common way of doing it. But it happens, you know, there is some process that there's an error or there's a need to an operator or a knowledge worker to intervene and manually correct something or manually upload something. But the vast majority of content are acquired either through virtual printing, meaning you don't actually send it to a printer, but let's say you're sending statements. Some of your customers are getting their statements by paper. Some are getting it online. And then so you have this process that you print the printer and then make it available to online through the single process, but it's virtual printing. So you can actually acquire the content by treating it like a printer file, but not actually printing it. Or you can do disk file, which is basically a common way is folder monitoring, FTP, those kind of things. Or you can actually program it. You can have a computer program that when the content is generated directly, let's say if you wanted to bring it into Alfresco, you can actually write a web script or a JavaScript to actually put it in your Alfresco repository directly. So the critical component of that process, once you do the definition and acquire the content, is a process that's called ingestion. If you're familiar with the ingestion is basically is not just storing the file, is actually doing a bunch of things to that file. So the very first thing you want to, there's a process of classification or recognition, is the system has to, again, since there's no human manual process involved, the system has to know automatically how do I classify it, converting it, securing it, indexing it. So that whole process of, in addition to storing it, making it useful kind of content in the repository is called ingestion. And then you have a whole series of functionality that are being used or will be used by users against that repository. That's called repository services. So the whole lifecycle management, access, search, and all kinds of things that you're already familiar with. So there's a couple of key points I want to emphasize here about this process because they're of humongous importance. They're very important kind of things to deal with when you're bringing that kind of content into Alfresco. One thing is people have been calling this report bursting or document bursting or splitting. And basically when these core systems create these kind of content, there's lots and lots of data. And so for example, when your carrier sends you your bill, it doesn't do it one customer at a time. They run it at the entire life cycle, and then there's a bursting process, splitting, each goes to an envelope. The same thing happens digitally. So when it is very inefficient to create that kind of content cut by customer, by department, you do it as a whole, but you leave it at the recipient system or vendor to deal with basically sorting it out and bursting it. And there's two methods. This is a physical bursting that almost everybody does, which I think is the wrong way of doing it. It always creates a lot of headache, a lot of mess, a lot of backup issues, recovery issues. It's just a big mess to create. And then it doesn't have all the functionality. So the problem with physical bursting is things can get out of control if you got a unique business need to have sort of, let's say, something that goes to two places, or one person sees two different things. Then the permutation of that goes out of control. And something I call virtual bursting, which gives you unlimited view of that without actually physically separating the file. And that's what we recommend that you do, and that's what we do. So a typical document in an ECM repository, you basically have different roles. Somebody can modify, somebody can delete, those kind of things. But when you make a document available in your Alfresco repository, you can't say, I want this person to see this page or that page. Basically, they see it. If they see it, they see it, that whole document. But they may have different roles to it that they may not be able to delete it or author it. That's the kind of security layer that you'll find in a typical ECM like Alfresco. Here's a typical security you see in a ERM or in our solution that you can bring into Alfresco. That is, you can define, and this happens automatically through your Active Directory. So there's no programming, there's very minimal. It's just a matter of a few minutes of setup. But you can actually, the system's smart enough to know, for example, if this user 2 has a profile in their Active Directory as part of the user profile, they can see this is a departmental manager or a regional manager. So they get to see whatever pages that's relevant to them. Or somebody may see 1 page or 0 page. Everything automatic. Again, one single file, unlimited virtual views. So this is the right way of dealing with document security, semi-structured, bring it into Alfresco. And we can do that. And then the next important concept, which is something we created, again, both of those things that I'm kind of highlighting is the right way of dealing with this type of problem, and they're only available by us because we created this kind of concept. One is called ViziDex, or the other important thing is visual indexing. I have found that people visually, when they're dealing with unknown things, they can actually get their work done quicker than in an abstract or kind of hunt and search mode. So by that, I mean, if you're looking at, let's say, a large report, and you don't know which page, whatever it is you're looking for, it's very hard to do search and find and those kind of things. But if I present it to you in a, let's say, a grid format or something you can actually filter, you can auto-filter, you can sort, then you can actually navigate through the report much better. And so this visual indexing is different than normal indexing because visually you can actually see, and I'll show you actually what I mean by that. So if you're looking at a report up here, this is the visual index. This happens automatically by the system, gets created. So this wasn't created as part of your SAP or Oracle or whatever program you had. This was created. We automatically create this one, and then there's a direct link for that. So instead of me trying to navigate this report, whether it's in paper form or electronic form, let's say I'm looking at this report, and I want to know, this is a sales performance report, and I want to know who's my #1 agent. And so all I do is, let's say I sort this column that's called bookings in descending order, and the first row tells me the answer to that. If I click that, it'll take me to that page. Very powerful concept and very, so people, when we introduce this to some of our customers, it will take them literally days to do something, whereas it would take them seconds now to do it. Because it would take them days because they would have to bring it down manually into Excel and then parse it, and then each report will have a different template. So it just very cumbersome kind of process. So what we're offering here is Alfresco VRM extension. We have, for those of you who are familiar with Alfresco AMP module, that basically means you don't really have to program, or you don't have to modify Alfresco. It's upgrade safe. You basically install a couple of modules in the repository, and you can even use the share interface. You don't even have to use our interface, user interface, but you can use our interface too. And those basically allow you to do everything I just talked about today, somehow magically. But no, it's not magic, it's actual computer code. So these are kind of summarizing, just so you know, I kind of zoomed in on 2 important things, but this tells you there's actually a lot more things that we can possibly cover in 30-minute session here. And some of you will know how important it is. But the one thing I would like to point out is why those statistics is very important, because it shows you all the activity of your capture process and your usage process. It's a really cool, neat tool to run in addition to what Alfresco offers you, because for a couple of reasons. One, if you're somebody who's in charge of operation, it gives you a lot of interesting metrics in terms of how data is being populated in Alfresco and how they're being used. And for your security people and auditing, it actually is let's say for Sarbanes-Oxley or HIPAA compliance, it's actually a good tool to utilize for that purpose. And I was actually planning on doing a demo. I'm willing to stay longer here. We're kind of running out of time, but this is my last slide as far as the presentation. But this is important because it kind of summarizes everything I said in terms of why is it that you want to do that? Because again, at the beginning I said everybody's going to do it. It's just a matter of you deciding whether you want to be the leader or basically at some point I don't think this is going to be optional, because it provides you with such a great value as an organization. And on top of that, it actually reduces your cost, because right now you got two kinds of cost, and then if you bring it into a single environment, definitely it will lower your cost of ownership. And the other important thing that I think it's important to highlight is this is really important. This is why I chose actually Alfresco to do this within Alfresco, because I love some of the features that are available in Alfresco, and I wanted to bring it into our ERM. And I thought instead of us or others trying to develop that, why don't we just use this great tool that's already out there? And then the inverse of that. Then I think if you go this route, then you kind of kill two birds with one stone, because now you can actually bring in cool features that you just saw today, some of which you saw today, into Alfresco. And I think the end result of that would be a better user experience. And you hear a lot about the biggest #1 obstacle. You heard it in the keynote, that user adoption is the key issue, that we have this great tool and people are not using it in some organizations. But I think if you throw in content that people need, people use it. So that's the #1. If people don't have a reason to go to your Alfresco repository, why should they? And so by automatically 40% of your content that you got somewhere else, if you bring it into Alfresco, right off the bat you increase the user adoption kind of possibility. Plus you bringing all these capabilities that are not hard to understand, they're actually very intuitive. It's going to save people time. So I think that's going to tremendously improve your odds in terms of battling that thing. So this kind of last slide, it talks about this is the name of our product as an add-on, is sort of the missing piece that we talked about at the beginning of the talk, and hopefully you saw that we were able to fill that missing piece with Alfresco. Now I'm going to, again, we're running out of time. I was planning on doing a demo, and obviously you can always contact us for demos, and we actually spent quite a bit of time preparing a really nice demo for you, but unfortunately it's very hard to do it in 40 minutes. But I would like to give at least a couple of minutes if you have questions. Yes, go ahead.
So the ViziDex that you showed earlier, is that using an OCR-based technology to, how is it recognizing the based on OCR?
Let me repeat it for the recording. You're saying, does the ViziDex capability within Reveal use OCR to do what it does, or how does it do what it does?
Very good question. So if you recall that I said the ingestion is sort of the key thing, then ingestion we don't, typically when other software companies talk about ingestion, they're talking about sort of partial metadata extraction and just storing. We're talking about parsing the entire content based on the rules you define. So these content, they come in, remember they come in all kinds of format. Now if they came in the format of paper, then yes, the answer to your question is the OCR has to be applied. But if they did not come in the form of paper, they were digital. So if they were AFP, PostScript, PCL, what we've done is instead of, this is sort of easier to maintain and gives you more flexibility, is we have a certain set of standards. So for example, PDF is a very common format that not only at generation time, but actually at deployment and distribution time, is everybody understands PDF. So PDF is one of the key components of our ingestion process. So if you give me, let's say, a AFP, in the past, I would actually have a native AFP processor to create you a ViziDex. But now what I do is I convert it to PDF. And then so I have a native ASCII text processor and native PDF processor. And then because of all my converters, I can do that ViziDex thing that you mentioned.
You talked about the folder monitor. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So a folder monitor, basically, it's a daemon for Linux and Unix people in the room, or a service for Windows people in the room. Basically, it's a computer program that runs in the background. And basically, whenever, in the case of a folder monitor, that daemon or service basically wakes up when a content appears in that folder. So when that wakes up, it basically grabs that file and moves it from the monitoring area to a staging area. And then the staging area, we have another daemon that basically puts it in a queue, and that queue basically deals with the ingestion. So if you got, let's say we have customer that in a given window of time, at 11 o'clock at night to 11:30, they generate thousands of reports. So that daemon, that computer program is going to be very, very busy. And then they can prioritize, like I want, so in case of not only prioritization at the server level, like I want up to 7 core of my CPU to be busy this time doing capture instead of making it available to end user, but also which of these reports I want processed faster or sooner. So there's a lot to that, but I think the basic kind of approach is basically through an automated computer program that wakes up when an event takes place.
So one of the earlier sessions that I attended is about on the Alfresco reporting the new feature introduced in 5.0, and it is essentially an integration with Pentaho.
Integration?
With Pentaho. Pentaho is enterprise reporting tool. So with that, is there a significant overlap between the Alfresco reporting with Pentaho compared to your product?
How do you, are you familiar with that, Chris? Pentahome? Is anybody in the room familiar? How do you spell that?
Pentahome.
Pentahome.
It's an enterprise reporting.
Yeah, see, I think I'm not actually familiar, so but I can guess that I think you and I talked about that different thing called HP Extreme, right? And I think
Right, HP Extreme is slightly different, but the one unique thing that I saw in your product is the ViziDex where you're able to parse out
right.
and then show that record. Not sure if they have that, but pretty much everything else, like automatically generating the reports based on your metadata and all categorization, they're all pretty much there.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look in.
Just curious, like how.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that, but I'll look into it. But I think there's assuming they're kind of the same, meaning that they're not generating reports, they're actually consuming reports. So one of the things, for example, we kind of emphasize is you already have great content in your organization. So there's no, we're not trying to ask you to create more content. These are derivative content like the ViziDex that are talking about, driven from already existing content. And then, you know, there's just a whole, I kind of highlighted a list of things. So I'm sure if you look at Pento, assuming it's kind of doing the similar thing, you'll probably find that there will be some differences, and that requires somebody understanding both systems.
Are you going to demonstrate the?
I can demonstrate, yeah. I was just going to make sure.
I came for that part. So.
Okay.
Our time, it is 11:40, so
We have
if
to
you
get out of the room.
Let's ask, do you have to leave the room?
We do have another session starting in 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right.
Another day then.
Yeah, I'm sure. Just contact us for those of you who are interested in seeing the demo because of good technology, WebEx and others. And
Where are you guys located?
we're located in Minnesota, primarily.
I'll try to contact you then.
Fantastic.
That sounds great. Yeah.
Thanks for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very much.